Let's get into the recipe. Tonight we're gonna be making tamales, and it's funny because it's supposed to be cold. We're supposed to be in wintertime, and here we are, and it's really hot. It almost feels like summer, but we're still making tamales. And tamales, of course, are very near and dear to many people's hearts in the Latino community. And I really love these tamales de chocolate because I find that they feel nostalgic, but they also are kind of this bridge between like the feeling of a brownie and the feeling of a tamal. And I think that the tamal for me makes more sense in terms of thinking about decolonial foodways, because tamales are something that our communities have eaten for generations and generations. And so is cacao. Cacao is native to Mexico, so it may have made its way. I'm not a historian, so I don't know the exact details of it, but I'm sure it at some point made its way into a tamal, and over time has evolved throughout different cultures and countries and has become, chocolate chip cookies and brownies and this and that. But it's something that we have eaten in our culture and learned how to process, because cacao is actually a very processed plant. If you go from the cacao bean to, just raw cacao, even there is a process of fermentation and drying and grinding and so many things involved to be able to get to that point of it even becoming a raw cacao powder. So it's like a really interesting ingredient that I love to use a lot. And if you're not even sure who I am, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Jocelyn. I'm the chef and founder of Todo Verde, which is a plant-based food business here in Los Angeles. And I focus on trying to make a lot of the things that we know and love and have a lot of nostalgia around, trying to make it plant-based. So still trying to create those same flavor profiles that our abuelitas may have used, but trying to essentially veganize things. And so we've done everything in these classes now, from menudo to tamales to ceviche, pozole, so on and so forth. So it's been a lot of fun, and to not just create these recipes, but then to share them with folks like you all who are really interested in trying to maybe evolve the way that you're eating, but then also trying to share this with your family members and your close friends. So that has also been really cool. So let's get into the recipe itself. We're going to start off with the tamales, and as we get those cooking, then we'll transition over to the atole. And for anyone who is cooking along, whether you're watching the recording later or watching live now, I did already mise everything out, which means that I've already measured everything out. So if it calls for 3 cups of this and 1 cup of that, I already have it measured out to just make my flow and process a lot smoother. And then I do have on my stove a pot that has a steamer basket on the bottom, and I'll show you what that looks like if you're unfamiliar with it. And essentially between the bottom of the pot and the steamer basket, there's probably about an inch or so of a gap where water will be, so that steam can permeate that pot and cook the tamales. So I have that on my stove, as well as a small pot for my atole. But again, we're starting with the tamal recipe. So let's get into that. And the other thing that I have prepped is the corn husks. So let's start with just talking about the corn husks for a second, so you can get that ready to go, especially if you haven't done anything with them yet. And then we can get into the actual tamal batter. So the corn husks you can buy at your typical Mexican grocery store. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you soak them. Ideally, if you're soaking them in room temp water, you want to give them at least a good overnight soak. So leave them in here for several hours until they become nice and pliable and really soft. If you're in a pinch and you want to get them pliable much sooner than that, you can make that work by using hot water. So if you were to get your tap as hot as possible, or you boil some water and throw that in there, the hot water will help to speed the process along. And then all I did was I put them in a big pot, and I used a heavy bowl that also was filled with water to just weigh down the leaves to make sure that all of it is really submerged into the water. Because sometimes what will happen is there's some bits like this that are not submerged, and the rest will be ready to go and really nice and pliable. But these bits that have been hanging out above the surface of the water are still hard. And so you want to avoid that, because you want to make sure that your tamales have this nice pliable surface that you can mold to the shape that you'd like, and that are really easy for steaming later once the tamales are ready. So I'm going to set this aside as we get our batter ready, and then once that's ready, I'll bring these back out and then show you the rest of the process. So right now you're just soaking and making sure that you get a nice pliable consistency. The other thing you're going to do is heat up some water. So I have an electric water kettle just right there, and I have a few cups of water in there. So it's probably going to take a little while I'm getting these other ingredients and showing you what I have going. And so I'm going to use 1.5 cups of hot water, but warm up a little bit more. All in all, you're going to need 1.5 cups of hot water for this dish. And I'm just looking at the recipe that I printed out for myself here, just to have all the amounts ready to go. And I'm going to need 2 cups of water for my atole. So all in all, that's 3.5 cups of hot water. So I like to just heat up a little bit more, just in case any evaporation happens, and then you can measure out as you're working. So let me get all my tamal ingredients here and pan down so you can see my countertop. So I'm just going to spread everything out. And I'm going to talk first about the masa harina, because I think that this is the most important ingredient of our tamal recipe. I know that many of us out there have seen maseca, for example, as the masa harina that everybody buys. Everybody has it in their household. It's available at every grocery store that sells masa harina or dry tortilla flour. And sometimes they even sell the masa preparada one, which is for tamales. And I don't like to use that one. And I like to make sure I mention it over and over again, just because it has so many other ingredients in it. And it really takes away from the flavor of the corn. Now, a tamal recipe, if you want to stay true to, original flavors and ingredients, I mean, it really is just corn that has gone through this process of nixtamal, which means that the corn has been boiled in a calcium limestone mixture that really breaks down the exterior husk of the dry corn, and then is soaked again for a long period of time, usually overnight. And then the next day they'll drain all that liquid out and give it a really good rinse in fresh water, removing all that exterior skin of the corn to be left with nixtamal corn. Now I'm using here this organic Bob's Red Mill masa harina. It's a brand I like to use fairly often. And whenever you're looking for masa harina, you should be able to turn over the bag and literally just see organic corn, hydrated lime, organic corn, trace of lime. I have here another brand called Masienda. And I did get a question from somebody about whether I use Masienda. Yes, I do use Masienda. I usually have some on hand here at home. I also use another brand called Gold Mine and a few others. As long as, again, I turn the bag and I see, where is this one's ingredients? It might be actually on the front. Yeah, here we go. Non-GMO heirloom corn premium with a trace of lime. Those are the only ingredients in this pouch of masa harina. So you're looking for something like that where they are really trying to keep the corn as the star ingredient and not so much all these other preservatives that are going to allow that corn to hang out on the shelf for really long periods of time in a grocery store. I will say that if you are using, different masas, this masa harina from Bob's Red Mill is a little bit more coarse, a little bit more heavy, I would say, whereas the Masienda, which I'm going to use for the Atole recipe, let me show you here, it's already poured out. This one is a white corn, so it's a little bit lighter, and the grind is more fine. So this one almost feels a little bit more like maíz quebrado, which means like it's broken up in slightly larger bits. It's not as fine, and this one is definitely like a fine, usually used more for tortillas. And I have tried making tamales from this and it does work. However, I do find that my overall masa preparada that I make ends up feeling a little bit more soft and almost a little bit more runny with this Macienda fine grind. So I really like to use Bob's Red Mill for my tamales. That's just my personal preference. Of course, if you have your favorite, you can absolutely use whatever your favorite is, and then just kind of keep an eye on the texture, trying to get it to the texture that I'm going to show you here right now. I'm gonna grab my hot water, and then I'm gonna go through and show you all the different ingredients that I'm using. Any questions on the masa harina at all? All right, everyone's good. Okay, so the other ingredients that we're going to be using are, of course, our 1.5 cups of hot water, which I'm going to measure out and pour in here in just a second. And then I'm going to follow that up with some plant-based milk. I have 1.5 cups. I'm just using unsweetened oat milk for this recipe. You could use unsweetened almond milk, whatever plant-based milk. It could be homemade. So use whatever your preference is. I like to buy most things unsweetened, unflavored. So no vanilla, no any other flavor, no coconut, like heavily flavored, I mean, because I just wanted to serve the purpose of like giving this a nice body and texture, not so much flavoring, because I'm going to flavor with other elements. And then I'll follow up with my fats here. So most masa preparadas have lard in them. Here, in place of the lard, or sometimes I'll have shortening, which is also a plant-based alternative. Here I'm going to be using a 1/2 cup of softened coconut oil, and make sure whenever you're picking up coconut oil that it is refined. Really, really important here. So I know some folks use virgin coconut oil, and the reason you want to stick to refined is because it's gone through that refinement process. It has eliminated the coconut flavor that virgin coconut has, and it's going to really lend to your tamales or whatever you're using the coconut oil for to taste like whatever you want it to taste like versus the coconut overpowering. So really important here, refined. If you did have virgin coconut oil, you could use it, but you're going to have this hint, maybe even a strong hint, because it's a 1/2 cup of coconut flavor in addition to your chocolate flavor. So just keep that in mind. I also use this coconut oil for savory tamales, and of course you don't want your savory tamales to taste like coconut, so really important for you to use a refined in that version. I'm using 4 tablespoons of vegan butter. My personal preference for vegan butter is Miyoko's. It's available at a lot of grocery stores now. It's Miyoko's Creamery. I find that her flavor profile and just the texture all around is really great. In the past, I've used Earth Balance and others, but I really, really love Miyoko's. It's one of my favorite out there. So 4 tablespoons of vegan butter. So it's quite a bit of fat here, and that's what tamales have. And believe it or not, prior to colonization, before we had fat and lard and all these things available, oils available to us, tamales just didn't have any fat in them. So when people say, oh, they're not tamales without the lard in them, it's actually not true. Our tamales were probably much drier back then, our ancestral tamales, but nonetheless, they were tamales in the way that people enjoyed them at that point in time. So you can definitely omit the fat and stick to more of the water and the plant-based milk if you wanted to. But just an option. This will be more of like what we're used to nowadays in terms of having a little bit of that fat in there. I will be sweetening our tamales with 3/4 cups. I'm going to be using 3/4 cups. If you are a sweet tooth and you love more sweetness, you can use a cup. Initially, I did 1/2 cup, and my partner and I tried them, and we are like, oh, it needs a little bit more sweetness. For me, I was like, you know, I can add just a little bit more, another 1/4 cup. For him, I'm sure he can double the amount of sugar in that recipe. So 3/4 cups to a cup, depending on your sweetness level. I do have also a pinch of just kosher salt in here because I like to add a little bit of salt to anything that is going to be sweet. And then I also do have here for dry ingredients, I have a tablespoon of baking powder that is going to help our tamales slightly puff and rise. And then I'm going to be using 3 tablespoons of raw cacao powder. And this raw cacao is just an organic cacao powder that I like to use for any of my chocolate recipes. And just a sidebar note, cacao is different than cocoa. cacao is something that is has gone through the process of, like I mentioned earlier, being fermented and dried and ground down to a powder. This is what cacao nibs look like. So this is when the cacao is broken down, but to smaller bite-sized little pieces. And then it gets ground down even further to this cacao powder. And once this powder becomes toasted, then it's cocoa. So toasted, cocoa now means it's gone through a cooking process. It's been toasted now. So it has a slightly different flavor. I guess kind of how coffee beans taste different raw than they do when they're roasted, right? So same rule applies, slightly different flavor. Whatever you have on hand will likely work. I love to just have raw cacao powder on hand all the time. And last optional thing that I'll mention is the chocolate chips. I'm just using a vegan chocolate chip that I found at my local grocery store. If you have a personal preference of some that you absolutely love, you can use whichever ones you have on hand. I can't remember the name of the brand of these right now. I'd have to climb up into my cupboard to find the bag because I store everything in jars and things. And these are not going to go into the batter. What I'm going to do is once I layer the masa onto the hoja, then I'll sprinkle in a few of these into the center. So I'm going to just set these aside for now, and let's get going with our masa right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour in my 1.5 cups of hot water. Let me grab my cup measurement. I have one that is for liquid right here. Let me rinse this out.
And Jocelyn, really quickly before we get into that, Maria wants to know where you purchased the Hacienda.
Yeah, great question. So sometimes you can find Hacienda at some health food stores, and it really kind of depends from store to store. I think this one I may have purchased on their website with a few other things. So you can absolutely go to their website and purchase it there. But my local health food store will carry different types of masarina, and they're not always the same ones available. So when I see something, I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna grab a couple just to always like have some on hand because I go through quite a bit. But if you don't go through as much as I do, then you can just maybe order a bag or something like that. And then I see another question coming in. It's getting cut off here.
Is turbinado sugar the same as piloncillo?
No, so there are different processes for different types of sugars. The raw turbinado cane sugar is one that I always have on hand at home. It is different than piloncillo. Piloncillo is like the real deal. Like if you're trying to go as close to the root as possible, to the plant as possible, it's gonna be piloncillo. And what you would do is just break it down, grind it down until you get the quantity that you're looking for. Some people grate it. I know you can do that more with like panela, but it's a little bit more tricky with piloncillo. Panela is more used in Salvadoran cuisine, so kind of depends on which one you're able to find. But yes, you can use piloncillo for this. I'm pretty sure folks have used piloncillo for this recipe. I just happen to have raw turbinado on hand. I rarely have white sugar on hand. However, recently I did buy powdered sugar because I kept trying to grind this down to powdered sugar and like it wasn't coming out the way I needed it to. And then today I baked, well, I didn't bake. I was on a live with a master baker and I asked her the question, can I grind this down, these like flaky crystals down to powdered sugar? It does turn white when I blend it. And she said no. So so just FYI, that's the word on the street. Just buy powdered sugar if it calls for it. And sometimes you really do need it. But otherwise, I use that raw turbinado. All right, so I am going to pour in 1.5 cups of hot water into my masarina. So there's 1 cup. And then I'll do a 1/2 cup. There we go. And it's nice and hot. So that's gonna help activate my masarina. I'm gonna start whisking that and try to get everything nice and wet here. It's definitely not enough moisture. Remember, we still have a 1.5 cups of that unsweetened plant-based milk. I'm gonna go ahead and drop that in right now. So I have a 1.5 cups. This is oat milk, unsweetened, unflavored oat milk that I'm using. But you can use almond or whatever it is that you have on hand. Just trying to incorporate this all together and also get it nice and warm too. I'm going to drop in my vegan butter and my coconut oil right now. And if it's too cold, then it's going to seize up. It's going to harden on me. So once I mix in that slightly chilled, because I got it out of the fridge a little bit ago, that plant-based milk, then I'll go ahead and drop in my fats here. So I have, again, my half cup of refined, very important, refined coconut oil. And then I also have my 4 tablespoons of vegan butter. It's softened. I'm just using my spatula here to kind of make sure that it's broken down into as much as possible, just kind of trying to get it smooth and breaking down so that it's not these big chunks of butter or anything. Again, everything in here was already kind of slightly softened. It's been sitting out for a little bit. I didn't get it directly from the fridge, and to drop into this recipe, you want to make sure that it slightly softens so that it's really easy to incorporate it. I'm just using this little mini spatula to scrape everything out. These ingredients are not cheap, so make sure you're getting every little last ounce into your recipe. All right. And I'll use this when I am done mixing here. So let me give that a mix until that starts to get nice and incorporated. And if you had a mixer, you can absolutely use a mixer if you wanted to. I find that it's fine with the whisk, and then I at some point get my spatula in here and I make sure that everything's really well incorporated. But if you had a hand mixer or a stand-up mixer on your countertop, you can absolutely use that. What you want to make sure that you do is that you need to make sure that your masa harina is nice and well incorporated. Sometimes what will happen if you don't mix enough is you'll have these little clumps, these dry clumps in your masa harina that are not moist at all. They're just sticking together. And when you cook that, it never really cooks through because it's kind of sealed into this little clump. And so you need to make sure that you use a spatula or a mixer or something to just really break that down. All right, I'm gonna put in here my 3/4 cups of my raw turbinado sugar as well as my pinch of salt. And then I'm also going to just put in here now my 3 tablespoons of my raw cacao powder and my 1 tablespoon of baking powder. So I'll go ahead and throw that in there. And that is going to also tint our masa harina to start to look nice and chocolatey. And I'm actually going to switch to my spatula at this point. And what I like to use my spatula for is not only like scraping the sides of the bowl and making sure that everything is really well incorporated, but I also like to scrape the bottom of the bowl, especially if I see any clumping or any bits that are not really mixing together well here. When I do that, I can use my spatula. This is like the tiniest spatula ever. Let me actually get a legit spatula here. Here we go. So when I do that and I kind of push and scrape at the bottom of my bowl, so like here's a little clump there, I'm just going to scrape and make sure that it's all well incorporated into the masa preparada, the masa that's slowly coming together here. So I'm just folding all these ingredients together until I get this nice, well mixed and kind of slightly smooth consistency. I don't like this sweet masa to get too runny because it's not going to get filled like the savory tamales are. So I don't want it to get too loose and runny where it's not kind of like sticking together, staying together as it goes through the cooking process. So all I'm doing is really trying to kind of work in all these ingredients. Any questions as I'm getting my workout of the evening? So you can see how it's coming together. Whew. This is a workout this evening. I'm seeing, like, I'm feeling like mine has more clumps than I typically have. And I'm like, wow, really? The one day I'm recording a class and then my masa's like, hey, I'm gonna hit you with those clumps today, you know? So you can see here, for example, like, look at that, right? You can see the golden masa harina that didn't mix into the chocolate. So that's what I don't want to see. I wanted to try to all come together and all be pretty consistent in the color also of the chocolate, which is so funny because this every once in a while will happen to me. But of course, my masa's like, let's do this today. So I'm just trying to scrape any of those out. It's going to take me a little bit more time than usual to just get a much smoother masa. And actually, I don't have like a regular hand mixer, you know, the ones that have the two, it's like two metal mixers and they do this, right? I don't have one of those. I have a like a handheld whisker, which I could bring into here and see if that works a little bit. Actually might do it just to kind of help break this down, but it's not as powerful as a hand mixer. I usually like to mix things by hand, literally by hand. All right, so this is still needs a little bit of work, but coming together. Any other questions coming up for anyone? And one thing you could do right now too is you can give your masa a taste. You can give it a taste. I'm actually going through and like trying to break out any clumps that I see with my hands because I'm like, why are you not breaking down? All right, so I'm gonna give it a little taste just to see if I like the amount of chocolate in there, the sweetness. Now, remember that each one of these tamales is gonna get hit with a little bit of chocolate chips if you are using that option. And if that is the case and you feel like it can use more chocolate, keep that in mind because you are going to get more of that chocolate flavor. And of course, the maize is shining through. You can absolutely taste the corn in this recipe. I can definitely taste the chocolate coming through. I think it's so good. It's so good. For me, the sweetness level feels just right. However, if you taste it and you're like, okay, I want to add that additional 1/4 cup of sugar, I want it to be a little bit sweeter because I want it to feel really desserty, then by all means, please feel free to do so. The other thing is, since you are having it with the atole, for me, it feels like sweet atole with sweet tamal. It's like, I'm not like a sweet tooth person like my partner is. So sometimes I feel like there's a word in Spanish called empalagada. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but it just means like your mouth just is so tired. It's like too much sweet. Like it's, you take a bite of this, it's sweet. Take a bite of that, it's sweet. So it's like you have to find a little bit of that balance. And not that I want these to be savory, but I just don't want to overdo it with like the amount of sweetness. Okay. So I'm going to show you how I assemble these. And what I'm going to do right now is in my sink, I'm going to drain out all the soaking liquid that I had my tamal leaves in. And you can absolutely rinse them if you wanted to. The tamal leaves are dehydrated and they are sometimes in a solution that helps them stay preserved so that they don't spoil in the pouch that you get them in. And usually you can't really like taste or smell it, but today I could. It felt like really acidic. So I'm going to give mine a rinse a couple times to get all of that out, like out of the leaves, out of the water. And then I'm going to start patting them down to use them for the tamales. So you can always do that process if you want to, especially if the corn is not organic. If you buy it at Mexican grocery stores, it might not always say if it's organic. It'll just be corn leaves for tamales. But sometimes online you can find some that come from organic corn, which gives you a little bit more peace of mind. But I'm just going to give these a little bit of a rinse in some fresh water and drain them out again. I'll do that one more time just to get any of that funkiness out of it. And it's not bad, but it's just something that I could taste. I could smell. I didn't taste it. I could like kind of smell the acid of it, if that makes sense. And so I don't want any of that to mess up the vibe that I'm trying to create with these sweet tamales. So I'm just giving them a good rinse.
And Jocelyn, could you let us know where you buy your leaves and where you could get organic leaves?
Yeah. So the leaves that I got most recently were actually at my local Mexican grocery store during the holiday season. So right now I feel like because it's COVID, it's like, you know, hard to go to all the specialty stores that I would sometimes go to. I do have a vendor that I work with who imports lots of chiles and things, and he tries to bring in some specialty items during the holiday season, but I didn't go there this year. So he's based in East LA at the Mercadito La Primera in East LA. But yeah, just regular Mexican grocery store. There's also, I don't know if they sell hojas on native seeds. I believe they might, but there is a website in the back of my book, In La Vida Verde, for native seeds. And you can buy organic pozole corn there. You can buy chiles there. They typically sell this brand called Los Chileros. And I'm pretty certain they also sell hojas, so you can check them out as well. All right, so let me come back to my batter here. I'm gonna try to give it one more good whisk just for good measure here, just because I wanna make sure. It's actually, the spatula is working a bit better right now. You're just gonna hear me struggle for a bit. All I'm doing is I'm just going and I'm just trying to see, are there any other clumps I wanna break down that are soft, but I need to make sure that they're completely broken down. Like, see that right there? I don't know if you can see that color difference with the light, but there's some light brown and then you can see the darker brown with the chocolate right in there. That's what I'm trying to break down. I want that all well incorporated. One thing you could also do is, which I haven't actually tried. Usually I try to get the masa and the liquids going, but it might be kind of interesting to reverse it. It was a big clump. You can see there the color of the lighter shade of brown against the contrasting chocolate color. Is to mix the raw cacao when it's still all dry. That's something that I need to try for the next round. And that's the thing with these recipes, everyone, is like, you know, I make sure that things like taste really good, but then I get more curious about, oh, what about this process? Or what if I did that or this and that? And if Sarah really let me go off the handle like that and do that with every recipe, like you'd never have the ingredients on time for any of these classes. She's always like, what about the ingredients for this? I'm like, oh, I need to test that recipe one more time. It's like the third time, fourth time, fifth time, you know? And my neighbors all love me because I give them all the all the reject and the good ones that didn't quite work out, even though they still taste good, but maybe they were just kind of missing something that I know could be better. So in this situation, I'd be like, let me mix all the dry ingredients first and then go ahead and add. Same way you would do in baking, right? All right, so let's go ahead. That looks much better. Still not my ideal masa harina in terms of getting all those little bits out, but still much better. Okay. So if we had an ideal world and more time, I would keep working at this or use a hand mixer just to get into the nitty gritty of it. So what I'm gonna use next to get my tamales ready is you just need a little towel or a nice sturdy paper towel to pat down your hojas that you're gonna be filling with this masa right now. And then I'm also using a scooper. It's not an ice cream scooper, even though it looks like one. But this is for food service and it measures out ounces. This is 2 ounces. But I just like to use a food scooper so that it just makes it easy for me to keep the tamales consistent in the amounts that are in each one. So I'm going to be adding about 3 ounces per tamal. So I'll do a full scoop and then a half scoop for each of them. So let me go ahead and get these dishes out of the way. And then we'll go going on this. Okay. So I want to talk briefly about the hojas before we get into stuffing all of them. So for the tamal hojas, this is like a dream right here. If you haven't made a ton of tamales, first things first, you want to use the inside of the hoja to roll the tamal in the shape that it naturally comes in. So the corn was inside of here, and you want to stuff it in that area versus trying to flip it upside down and roll it in the opposite direction. You don't want to do that. So go with what nature has given you and just put whatever is, you're making inside. And then you want to just use a towel to just pat down any excess liquid. If they're still pretty wet, they're obviously going to still be damp, but you don't need them to be soaking wet. And then the other thing is, the reason I was saying that this is the type of hoja that I love is because it's nice and wide, and it's like the texture of it is perfect. You can see here, it has these like nice, very clear ridges, and it's pretty smooth in terms of it not having any additional textures beyond these ridges here. Let me show you one that for me would not be an ideal situation for a tamal. Let's see, this one kind of shows, let's see this one here. So this one here it'll still work, but you can see here that it not only has the ridges that the corn husk naturally has, but then it has like all these kind of additional like ripples and ridges at the bottom. And that'll work fine, but what it starts to do is like whatever shape the hoja is or whatever texture it has, the tamal is going to take on that shape as it cooks. And when it has all these other things, it just, for me, doesn't make it look as cool, as uniform as all the other ones. So sometimes what I do is I'll just use these if I need like a little extra, like if this hoja was too narrow, if it didn't have like this whole piece here, I would use this one to just create a little bit of extra space and try to get most of the masa on the side of the hoja that looks really nice. So you may need to mix and match and like piece things together. It's a little bit of Tetris, but if you get hojas like this, you're already in good shape. So again, I'm gonna do a scoop and a half to get about 3 ounces of masa in here. So that's 2 ounces, and then I'll get about a half scoop or so. Doesn't have to be perfect, but for me that just, helps. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go ahead and use my spatula. And I don't need to, this isn't gonna be like the savory ones where you have to spread it and like really fill all this stuff into the tamales. You just need to spread it enough to create a little bit of a space for some chocolate chips. Remember, we have those chocolate chips. If you don't have the chocolate chips, you don't even have to spread it out. You can just roll up your tamal as is. And I'm just gonna put you can put like about a tablespoon or so, a little under a tablespoon. And then what I'm going to do, let me move this a little further out of the way so you can see, is I'm just going to fold this onto itself. I'm going to fold on one side of the tamal onto itself, fold the other side until I essentially seal the chips in there. I don't want the chips to be on the edges because I don't want them to melt and ooze out. I want them to melt inside of my masa. And so what I'll do is I'll start with folding over the right side of my tamal. Let me pan down just a little bit more. Fold down that right side, and then I'll fold over the left side and I'll just roll, roll, roll. And then wherever this opening ends up, that's the back. So then I'll keep the back facing up, use my fingers to pinch up slightly, and then fold up towards the opening. So all the openings are all on the back side, if that makes sense. And then you'll have this open top here. You can just kind of slightly pinch it to seal it a little bit, or you can just leave it as is. Or I'll show you another way that some folks like to create kind of like a little bolitas of their tamales. Although my family didn't do that, we did tamales this way, savory, sweet, it didn't matter. We just made them this way. But some people like to do like the tying of the tamales. And so this would be another example where like if this hoja was maybe not the ideal one, maybe it's already like really ripped up and it's going to be difficult to use. And what you can do is you can tear strips. You can tear it up to make strips out of it, and these strips will end up becoming the strips that you use as ties for your tamales. So for this example, I'm going to make a much smaller one. So let's say here, I'm going to use this tamal husk, or this corn husk. And let me go ahead and grab, I'm going to just do 2 ounces for this one. So I'm just going to do 2 ounces. You can create a little area to put your chocolate chips in the center. Let me go ahead and push those in. And then what I'm going to do, so I just have my chocolate chips there. You can fold it towards itself so that you have a little mini covered tamal now. And so same thing here. You're going to fold over the right side, and notice, sorry, I didn't mention this. For the first tamal, I was more focused on the masa a little bit closer to the bottom where the husk is wider. But for this one, I'm a little bit more in the center because I'm going to try to tie a knot up here to seal it. So just keep that in mind that if you're doing this technique, you want to stick to more of the center of your tamal husk. So I'm going to fold over the right side and then fold over the left side, and then pinch at the bottom, fold up towards the opening. And then what you could do is you could either, a couple things, you can tie. So let me go ahead and lay this down, and I'm going to bring my little tie here and just tie the top. You can do that and just create a little knot, or maybe a couple little knots, or a little tie, whatever works best for you. You need to, it's like you apply a little bit of pressure, but not enough to rip it like crazy. And then for the bottom, you can either tie like this and just leave this like that, kind of popping up, or you can still fold it. And I prefer folding it and then tying, because then the tamal stands much nicer in the steaming pot. If it were like this, then it's still going to have to fold over, but the tie is here, so it's kind of in the way, where I prefer to just already have it folded, and then you can tie the other tie here if you wanted to, which, to be honest with you, isn't really super necessary, because once it's folded over and you start stacking them in the pot, after a while it's gonna naturally just stay folded that way. So you could definitely go this route or this route, whatever works for you. And then the other one I was mentioning is if you wanted to do, let's just see if I can get this tiny one to work. Another 2 ouncer here. I'm going to go in the very center. Let me create a little bit of a little divot here that I can just put a few chocolate chips into, and then fold it. I didn't quite create enough of a divot, and you know what, this husk is too teeny tiny for this. It is too teeny tiny. I would need to get another one, because this is like gonna burst open as soon as I start to get some of that masa rising. So if that is the case, all you can do is simply grab another husk, and you can just do this. You can fold it over and roll it up with another one. And again, wherever that opening is, you're gonna have that be at the top. You can fold over, or if this was the route that you wanted to do, you can even fold over like this and tie it here and tie it here. So I'll show what that looks like. So let me start with just holding that there, because essentially what this is also doing is like helping the masa to not move around. You want it to kind of stay in that center area. So I'm gonna tie here. Let me give it one more. And so as you can see, this process of tying is also like a whole other task. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So So this is definitely like one of those things that I find to be like a family effort. You need to have the whole team involved here. So notice that what I did was that was different than the last round is I just kind of, instead of folding it up right at this point, folding it up towards the backside, I kind of folded it a little bit further down so that this doesn't have any masa inside, but just to create a little place for me to tie the tamal together. And so this for me is the most beautiful presentation when you're getting a sweet tamal. It looks so cute and it feels like you're unwrapping a gift because of the double ties, and it looks really thoughtful, you know? So you can absolutely take the time to do that. Otherwise, you know, you can absolutely do something like this. And the other thing is, if you were to make a half batch, for example, which I have done in testing recipes, if you do this, your tamales will likely come out in this shape. But if you do this and the pot isn't full of enough tamales, as they cook, because there's like more wiggle room for them to move around, the shape of the tamal might kind of ooze down towards the bottom, or maybe they'll get a little bit wider at the bottom, a little bit more narrow at the top. So the shape doesn't always come out super perfect, just FYI. And so those are the 3 different styles that you would tie this. These for me indicate more of a sweet tamal versus this could be sweet or savory, right? With the opening at the top. And then what you want to do is you want to turn on your pot with the water at the bottom. So I have here, we haven't even been to the stove yet, y'all. So I just turned on my pot. I have some steaming here that I'll take out towards the end of class so that we can have a tamal along with our atole, which we're going to start working on right now. But I have here a steamer basket at the bottom of my pot, and that's just going to allow the steam to move throughout the pot and cook all these tamales. These are already pre-cooked. These were part of my test batch. So I just need to warm them through, which is why I turned on the pot. But I also want to show you that the way that you put tamales into a pot is you want to start with wherever the openings are. That's the back, right? The back needs to be touching the sides of the pot, going all the way around. So, you know, here is the opening or the back of my tamal here. And so that's going to be touching the edge of the pot. And I'll keep going around and doing that for all of my tamales until I get the whole perimeter of the pot lined, and then I'll do an inner circle, and then sometimes some will lay on top. And you then will want to put your lid on a jar, which these tall ones are not going to let me close it all the way anyway. But you want to try to cover it a jar just so you don't get a ton of evaporation that's happening, that you're still getting them to capture the steam as much as possible in the pot. If you have a big opening, like you really can't close your pot, you can also use something like foil around the openings just to allow that steam to hang out in there. And so what you want to look out for as you're steaming tamales is you want to make sure, and I'll show you what that looks like later, because I just turned this on so you can't see the steam just yet. But if you have a glass jar or a glass lid like I do, what you'll see is a lot of water condensation, a lot of bubbles here. And you'll know that there's water in this pot, that there's actively steam happening here. You can always move your tamales around with a set of tongs and look to see if there's still water at the bottom. And if you feel like it's starting to get dry and you're seeing more smoke versus steam, you can drop in some more water. And if you hear a loud sizzle like then that sizzle is also an indicator that you were probably running really low on your water at the bottom. And so, you know, you're going to get that sizzle and that, you know, like high boiling point right away with the water that you drop in there. So all those things are things that you should look out for. These need to cook at about medium heat for about an hour, perhaps even like an hour and a half or so. So medium heat, make sure you have that steam flowing, lid as a jar, not too open, and cook them for an hour, hour and a half. You'll know when they're done when they feel, they're gonna be soft, but they'll feel a little bit more firm to the touch. And then also, if you wanna take one out and test it, once you see that the leaf easily peels away from the masa, that there's like a clear separation, then you also know that they're done too. So I'll show you what that looks like towards the end of class. Right now, let's focus on the next element, which is our atole. But any questions on tamales actually, before we move on to the atole? Just making sure we're all good. All right, I think everybody's okay. So the atole is actually really fast. So we'll get into it. Let me share the ingredients. I'm reheating some more hot water just to incorporate all my ingredients here. So I have a small pot on my stove, and I actually need to wash my whisk. So let me do that really quick. I only have one whisk and I used it for the tamales. Let me just give it a really good rinse. Okay. So I'll go ahead and put that in my pot. We are ready to start on this next element. So atole. Atole is amazing. It's so delicious. It's sweet, but it has that corn element that makes it feel more than just like a little sweet dessert. I grew up eating the little paquetitos of maicena, which is actually cornstarch. They don't use masa harina. I've looked at the ingredients and I like, you know, like, can I recreate this? And my favorite was absolutely the strawberry and the vanilla one. So I don't know if you all had favorites out there, but they had chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and maybe like a plain one or something like that. I think they had like 4 flavors. And so we were always stocked up on maicena. That was like the thing where I was like, ooh, I want a little something. Let me get my little, you know, as at a young age, like already getting that cooked up for myself. So trying to recreate those flavors has been fun, and I feel like this recipe is pretty close. And but I think it still feels like more natural, natural than that brand feels, right? Than that like highly processed little powdered patch that's like hanging out in your cupboard for a long period of time. So I'm going to start off with just putting 4 cups of unsweetened, unflavored plant-based milk in my small pot, along with my sugar or my sweetener. Ooh, and some of it stuck to the bottom of my bowl here, so it made a little bit of a mess because I had them all stacked together. So I'm using here 2/3 of a cup of raw turbinado sugar, which is the same sugar that I used for the tamal batter. You can absolutely use piloncillo for this one as well. And you can break it up into, you know, like it doesn't have to be as fine at granules, because it's gonna cook in a pot and it's gonna melt down a lot easier. So I have here my 2/3 cup of my sugar. Some of it went onto my countertop. All right, there we go. And I have a pinch of salt. So 2/3 cup raw turbinado sugar, 4 cups of plant-based milk. And all I'm gonna do is just put this into a pot and let this start going. So there's my 4 cups. And then here is my sugar. Give that a little whisk. Get it mixed in, and then the heat is going to do the rest for me. So you would do the same if you had the piloncillo or the raw turbinado. Let me go ahead and turn on my heat to about a medium low. You don't need to go to a high temperature because you don't want it to scorch and burn. You don't want it to bubble over. You want to keep an eye on it. And you just want that sugar to melt. This is going to be on for a little bit, not a lot of it, but you know, you just want that sugar to like do its thing and melt and not feel like it's going to burn and stick to the bottom of your pot. So that is our sugar, our milk, and the pinch of salt. And so the other elements that we're going to work with, I heated up some water again right now, and I have here my masa harina that I'm going to add to 2 cups of hot water. So the masa harina is 2/3 cup. It's the same amount as the sugar essentially. And I have 2 cups of water and hot water. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it to a bowl, and I'm going to use my whisk to just slowly whisk in that water. And I want to get rid of any potential clumps now before it goes into the larger pot with all the milk, because at that point it's going to be too hard to get all the clumps. So if you do it here in a smaller receptacle and then transfer it once it's nice and smooth, it just makes your life so much easier. Worst case scenario, you can even throw this in a blender and like blend it to just incorporate it really, really well. I've totally done that, you know, when I'm having a hard time with clumps or anything like that, and it helps to just smooth the whole thing out. The other ingredients I will be using are maybe a little bit unfamiliar. I'm using here 6 tablespoons of strawberry powder that is super fragrant, and it just like permeates the room in this like amazing, delicious smelling strawberry flavor. And the way you get this is by using these freeze-dried strawberries. Let me actually get I think I have another bag here. Yeah, I do. So I tend to have some of these on hand. They sell them everywhere now, from Trader Joe's, Whole Foods to like most health food stores. And they're just dried strawberry pieces. They literally look like just dehydrated strawberry bits. And they're super, super flavorful and fragrant. So they're just slices that got dehydrated or freeze dried. And all I do is I put them in my Vitamix and I blend them. You can maybe use a spice grinder or a food processor to grind them into a powder form. And I add them to different things. It could be baked goods, or it could be this atole, you know, whatever it may be. Sometimes the pieces don't break down all the way, which is still fine, because once it's nice and hot, it's still kind of like incorporates it to the overall dish. So this is 6 tablespoons, so quite a bit. This is really what's going to give us the flavor. And I find that this hits the spot of that strawberry flavor so much more than fresh strawberries. It's perhaps because the flavor is so concentrated with these freeze-dried strawberries, and it's also so sweet. Like it tastes like sweet, like they just got the most perfect strawberries that were like just at the peak of the season, and then they freeze dried them at that point, and they're just like so deliciously on point. Whereas, like, you know, we buy fresh strawberries and like sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're kind of like you know, the sabritos, like they don't really taste that strawberry flavorish. And so this really hits the spot like time and time again. It keeps the flavor consistent. And then one thing that's totally optional that I'm using mostly for color here is I also like to use beet powder for something. So I have here just some dehydrated beet powder that I have on hand from a chef store called Surface here in Los Angeles. You can also buy this online. And I'm just using a tablespoon, and you can see there the vibrancy of the color of the beet powder. And what this is going to do is just give me like a really vivid, nice pink color. I mentioned this in the strawberry rose class recently, that I tried to add beet powder to a cake that I baked, and it didn't work out because in the end everything turns brown when you bake it, because it cooks so long and at such a high temperature. So like all this stuff works for this atole because we're going to add it at the end, and it's not going to cook a whole lot with this in it. Mainly what we want to cook is this, right? The milk, the sugar, the masa harina, and then at the end we're going to flavor it essentially. So let me head back to my stove. Any questions so far? I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but just trying to explain as much as possible. Let me pan over to my pot. Let me actually pan down a little bit so you can see this pot more closely, like that. Fool's gone wild. Look at it closely right here. All right, here we go. Okay, so as I'm whisking, what I'm trying to feel with my whisk, so your whisk is an extension of your hands, and you can feel what's going on in this pot. Am I sticking to the bottom of the pot? Nope, I'm not. That's great. Can I feel crystals of sugar at the bottom? Actually, no, not really, I can't. So that is great. It's coming along. It still doesn't feel like the sugar crystals are all the way dissolved. I can feel like there are some granules down there. So this needs just a little bit more time, but it's definitely coming up to temperature. Now, let me grab a bowl. And I'll work right here, right next to the pot, so you can still see. pretty close up here. I have my 2/3 cup of masa harina, and this was the more fine grind Hacienda white corn. So the white corn is also going to allow my color of the beet powder and the strawberry mixture to look so much more potent because it's white and not yellow. And I'm going to go ahead and add 2 cups of hot water to this masa harina. I'm going to start with my 1 cup. Let me actually do this slowly here. So there is my 1 cup, and I'm just going to pour that in. And then let me whisk that first before adding the other one. So I just want to start to get that incorporated. It's going to be a little bit thick. This is where that other cup is going to come in right now and loosen it all up. But I just want to get that a little bit worked in. So there's that 1 cup, right? And then let me get my hot water. I'm going to get 1 more cup and pour that in. And I'm just doing that 1 cup at a time just so that hopefully I don't burn myself. I don't know why I got like the smallest bowl for this, because I feel like I am going to splash around and burn myself. So you just want to slowly work that in. Look at all the masa in the middle right here. Yeah, let me transfer this to a larger bowl. I don't know why. I was like, you're going to be able to see better if it's in this bowl, but nope. I'm going to transfer this all to this larger bowl. Let me get these out of the way. Today I actually did a live with a friend of mine, a mentor of mine. Her name is Roxana Julipat. She's a master baker here in LA. And it's funny because I mentioned on that live that she's one of the first people that I ever talked to when I was thinking about starting this business, starting Todo Verde. And I was like, I'm really excited to, do work in food and be in the food industry. And she was like, oh no. She's like, let me squash that dream in a good way. She was like, the food industry is not about being exciting. It's about messy, creative, drama-filled days that require cleaning so many dishes, nail-biting hours. Like, it's like biting the bullet, like you're trying to get the food out at just the precise moment and bake things at just the right time. And like, it's totally that. It is absolutely 100% that, It's always messy, but it's fun, it's creative. It's just a whole other vibe. And I feel like so many more people are getting into it right now, since you're cooking at home now more than ever. And it's a time to get like even more creative and excited about what we're doing in the kitchen. So yes, for me, it's still exciting, even though she said it was not just exciting, but it totally is. All right. You can see here this consistency of my masa harina. So you want to try to get that a little bit more smooth. For me, it's almost coming together. I see still a little bit of lumps. And in fact, I'm just going to hit it with a touch more hot water, just a touch. Because I want to loosen it up just a little bit more. Let me actually come to my counter just so you can see even more close up just this here. So you can see here, it's kind of like what looks like this. Does cream of wheat look like this? Like it's kind of loose. And I'm just trying to work out any lumps that I see until I get a pretty nice smooth consistency. And then we will drop that into our pot with the milk and sugar mixture and the salt. All right. I see a little bit of clumping still. What is up with my clumping today, everyone? So again, a hand mixer, a blender could be used. This is still gonna break up a little bit as it cooks in the pot with the milk mixture, but I just don't want to deal with it later. So let me try to nip it in the butt right now and get this as close to the texture that I want. So again, just using my whisk here. This is why I love using silicone spatulas, because they're so pliable. It's like, again, this is like an extension of your hand. This is more of an extension of your hand, more than the whisk, because it's like so pliable. All right. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add this mixture to my pot. Let me get this whisk in the pot because I'm going to use that to bring it all together. Let's head back to the pot over here. Let me pan up. All right. And I am going to drop in that masa harina with the water already smoothed out. I'm using my spatula to scrape out every little last bit of it. I'm sorry you're getting the back of the thing, but I'm righty, so it just is what it is. There we go. All right, so we have all of that in there. And then let's use that whisk. To get it all well incorporated in here. And at this point, again, it's just like a sweet atole. If we were doing a more traditional atole, we would have a cinnamon stick in here brewing along. A Ceylon cinnamon stick to be specific, which is that flaky cinnamon often used in Mexican cooking. And as this cooks, it'll slightly thicken up. I'm gonna give this a couple minutes before I add the strawberry and the beet mixture. And once we add that and we whisk it in, that is essentially it. Just making sure it comes to temperature, it gets slightly thick, and we are good to go. And actually, I'm kind of curious because I have made this with Bob's Red Mill masa harina, and right now I'm using the Hacienda. So I'm also kind of curious, like, how is it going to be as thick? I imagine it's not going to be as thick as the batch I made with Bob's Red Mill, which actually needed to be loosened a bit more, which is why I mentioned like it's 4 cups of plant-based milk plus any additional needed if it gets too thick. The more you cook it, obviously the slightly thicker it gets because you're also having some evaporation happen. Right now I'm on about slightly just under medium. I'm like not quite at medium low, like not in the middle. I'm just a little under medium heat because I'm here, I'm watching it, I'm whisking, it's not going to burn. If I step away from this, I absolutely will turn down the heat because I want to make sure that I don't get any scorching or burning to happen. And I want this to come to a simmer. I can see it's starting to get nice and steamy. And once it comes to a simmer and it thickens up, then we'll be ready to add the other ingredients. And we're almost done. And I know we're almost out of time too. So we're just about getting there. I could see my tamales here are steaming. So we are gonna wrap this up and then just assemble that final dish. So you can see the atole as well as the tamales ready to go. Any other questions coming up for anybody as we're waiting for these last elements to come together? Everyone's like, no, we are We got it. I'm excited to see what everybody's recipes are gonna, or their tamales and their atole is gonna look like. Okay. I'm actually gonna put the lid on this for a second just to try to get it to get a little hotter on me. There we go. So we'll give that just a couple minutes and then we will finish up our plating and then we will be good to go. And as I mentioned earlier, when you sign up for these classes, you get the recording, you get the ingredient list, and you also get the full recipe afterwards. So you'll get to see all the play-by-play afterwards again, and then you'll also be able to just kind of follow along the recipe if you feel like you kind of got a sense of what it should be, and then just want to get guided in kind of those more written out cues. The other thing that I have that I realized I didn't mention in the ingredient list for this class is I always have cacao nibs on hand. So from the pictures that you saw, you see that I'm using cacao nibs as a garnish. You can use chocolate chips if you have that, but if you have cacao nibs, I really like it just because they're crunchy, you know, and they're also a little bit bitter. So I really love using cacao nibs. Here, let me put them in my hand just see if you have never really worked with them. They're essentially little bits of the cacao pieces that are broken down into smaller little nibs. And if you eat them as is, like that's truly what chocolate tastes like. It's bitter, it's not sweet whatsoever. And I love it. I love it as a garnish for a lot of things. Like I said, I'm not a huge sweet tooth. So even when I eat ice cream, sometimes like if I feel like it's too sweet, I'll throw something like cacao nibs on it to create a little bit of like this bitter, sweet balance that feels like it's not overpowering in the sugar side. All right, let's see. I'm still not simmering on my milk and sugar mixture. I'm like, all that time it's been on the stove, it's not simmering. And now I'm looking at the clock like, simmer, hurry. But we'll give that just another minute. Let me grab my plate so that I can plate some of the tamales and we can talk about that. And then we'll finish up our atole. Okay, so for the tamales, I'm gonna grab some tongs and we'll take one out for now. Let me grab my towel to open this up. And these should be nice and warm now. And when you first cook the tamales and they've been in the steamer for, you know, that hour and a half, they're gonna be really soft. So one thing that I like to do when I cook any tamales, not just these sweet ones, is I like to cook them for that time frame, and then I turn off the heat and I just let them hang out in the pot. Ooh, and now I'm spilling over. And I like to cook them in the pot for, sorry, I got distracted with that spilling over because I'm like, oh, I wanted you to simmer, and then all of a sudden I turned my back and it went crazy on me, and it's gonna be a mess, but it's totally okay. Again, Roxana said it would be a total mess, and it is. So, okay, what I was saying about the tamales is that I turn off the heat. So hour and a half goes by. I set a timer. So like an hour goes by, my timer goes off. I go to the pot and I check to see how are they looking. Do they still feel like they're a little too soft, too pliable? Or if they have the opening at the top, I look at the top of the tamal and I'm like, that looks like it's not done yet. And then it needs a little bit more time. And so I'll do that, set a timer again, like 15 minutes, 30 minutes later. And then once I look at them and I'm like, these are good, they still feel soft, like, because they're just fresh out of the steamer, but they're not soft like they're raw anymore. I just turn off the heat, leave them in the pot with the lid on, and just let them hang out there for, I would say at least like 30 minutes sometimes before I even like start taking them out and serving them. They're still gonna be piping hot because they're all right next to each other and they're like holding all that heat. So they're still gonna be really hot, but I find that they set a little bit better when I do that versus like immediately trying to like, all right, an hour has gone or hour and a half has gone by and like, let me go ahead and take them out and start eating. Let them set a little bit and I think that they'll have a little bit better of a shape. So here's my tamal that has been, this is from a previous batch that I cooked. And you can see here, this previous batch that I cooked, I will say, I only cooked maybe like 6 tamales in that big old pot. And so you can see here how like my tamal batter started here and it like sank down. And so that may happen if you don't have a full pot, because essentially what happens is like, they have too much space to kind of like relax. And when the pot is full, they don't have that space. They're all pretty much right next to each other. And so they really hold the shape a whole lot better. So if you make a full batch, you should be fine. If you make a half batch, you may want to do the double tie that I mentioned. So, or that I demonstrated. I'm going to get rid of the leaves that have that were directly touching the tamal and plate on this one here. And so I have my little bit of tamal here. And you can absolutely garnish, like if you wanted to do like a sweet cashew cream, you can even like melt some chocolate on a double boiler. So like you can have a pot of water going and then put a bowl on top with some chocolate chips and like melt them down. You can just add the cacao nibs to offset the sweetness. You can add little bits of strawberry. It could be like diced strawberry. It could be strawberry slices, but that is a tamal. And I'll get a fork into that right now, so you can check that out. And so I know we added those chocolate chips in the center. It's not going to be like I cut into this and it's going to be oozing out. It's going to be kind of like a chocolate chip where like the chocolate chips are there and they kind of melt into the masa. And you'll have some bits that feel like a little bit more oozy chocolate, but it's not going to be like what are those chocolate cakes called that have like where all the chocolate just like oozes out of the center? It's not that, right? Because we didn't add that much chocolate and it wasn't already melted, and you have to do so much more to get it to that point. But you'll have this like nice, slightly fluffy tamal texture with this nice chocolatey flavor. So good. And I love the bitterness of the cacao nibs. So there is our chocolate on chocolate on chocolate tamal, or cacao on cacao on cacao. And then let's come back to this crazy mess on my stove right now that is going to be so awesome cleaning. I like turned off the heat because I was like, oh my God, this went insanity right now. As soon as I turned my back, I was like, this is something you want to babysit. Well, I guess on your end, it doesn't look that bad. So let me just downplay it. It's fine, everybody. It's not that bad. So you can see here that this atole has thickened up. Hopefully you can see that that's thickened up on your end, but let me perhaps show you with a spoon. So you can see how that has started to thicken up. And I actually like turned it all the way low because it spilled over, but it had just started simmering. Actually, I think I turned off the, there we go. So if that keeps simmering even more, it'll keep thickening up even more so. And the other thing you want to do is you want to go ahead and add your strawberry. So you have your 6 tablespoons of the strawberry powder. Sometimes it kind of sticks to itself because of all the sugars. So I'm just using my fingers to kind of break that down a little bit. And then let's go ahead and add that. So I added my strawberry powder as well as my beetroot powder. You want to just mix that all in until it's nice and well incorporated. And you don't want to add too much of the beetroot powder. It's like literally just enough to paint, you know, to tint. If it didn't have the beetroot powder, it would just be more of a faint pink. It looks more vivid pink because of that beetroot powder. But obviously the strawberry is still going to tint the color of the atole, but not this much. And you can see that there are some strawberry bits floating around, like some of them look kind of white, some of them look more bright pink. I like that. If you didn't want that, you can absolutely you know, make sure that you grind your strawberry powder even more to a fine powder to avoid having any little bits. But those are the little chunks of strawberry that didn't break down all the way in the grinding process in my blender. And as they rehydrate in this liquid, they're gonna kind of thicken up and get really soft and mushy and like kind of just ooze into the overall atole. But check that out, everybody. That looks so good. It like coats the spoon so nicely. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour some out in a cup. I'm just gonna use this mug here. I'm gonna use a ladle just to help me get it out of the pot. So check that atole out. All right. And I'll just carefully pour that with the ladle into a cup or into a mug. And that is complete. I haven't tasted it yet for sweetness, but again, you know, you can give it a taste. I already have tested this recipe, but if you feel like it could be sweeter for you, you can absolutely make it a bit sweeter. So salud to everyone. I'm gonna give it a little taste. It's pretty hot. And that strawberry is on point. That strawberry flavor, it's so potent. And you know, 6 tablespoons, I mean, it's not a little bit, but it's definitely enough to like pack a punch of flavor in here. So here's our atole. Here is our tamales de chocolate. Ooh, and these chocolate chips, look at that. They got nice and soft. They're melting because the tamal itself was hot. So you can see here that they're nice and oozy and melting. So good. All right, any questions here?